I'm Bree, one of the co-founders of Frank Body.
Hi, I'm Jess, one of the co-founders of Frank Body.
Welcome to Selfish, a podcast that is all about putting yourself first and redefining the word selfish.
Over this content series, we're exploring a variety of topics with some amazing faces that you'll know, from self-awareness with Brooke Blurton to self-discovery with Jackie Gillies.
We're also talking about self-pleasure with Chantel Otten and self-wealth with the incredible Victoria Devine.
Podcast episodes for Selfish drop weekly on Tuesdays, alongside a whole bunch of amazing tools, tips and tricks from our team that you can find across the Frank Body social channels.
Find us wherever you listen to your podcasts and let's get selfish together. We just interviewed the incredible Victoria Devine. For those who don't know, she is an award-winning and retired financial advisor, best-selling author, and host of Australia's #1 finance podcast, She Is on the Money. She's also the founder and co-director of Zella Money.
V is... I'm going to say a really bad pun, a wealth of knowledge. She's so smart and just not gatekeepy at all about anything, and very passionate about financial literacy for women, which is why we wanted to have this episode, because you and I are also very passionate about this topic. It's something that comes up in the Frank Body office a lot when we're talking about educational tools that we can provide to our audience, even though it's got nothing to do with what we typically do day to day, making body care products. We know it's so relevant to our 20 and 30 something audience, and we've both gone through our own journey of financial literacy.
Yeah, we've both always said you create the life you lead. And, you know, for us, that was starting a business. But there's so much more to it than just that. There's so many different ways you can create your own wealth. And I think that was what was so interesting about this topic was it was, you know, we talked about everything from breaking down all of these stereotypical boundaries that we've had. It's really in the last few decades that women have been allowed into this world. Like, it wasn't actually that long ago that women weren't allowed to apply for credit cards or get bank loans without a bank guarantee from a male spouse.
That's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? And we've even seen those conversations amongst our friends only start to take place in recent years. So there's we've got hundreds of years worth of catching up to do as women, and it's so nice that there are finally resources dedicated to us as women, because we are on our own unique journey and we do have our own unique experience of the world. So it's a great episode for anyone, whether you feel like you're right at the beginning of your journey around self-wealth and financial literacy, or even if you know things. We are big believers in never assume you know everything, go back to basics and relearn. And so pour a glass of wine, go for a walk, do whatever it is that's going to get you in the mood, because it's a really great episode with Victoria Devine.
We hope you enjoy.
So many days feeling cold and cold, slowly sitting all the time living in blue.
Hi, Jess.
Hello, Bree.
We're here today with Victoria Devine. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
We're very excited for this conversation, and we've read your book. We know a lot about you, but we know there are some of our listeners who might not know that much about your background. So we thought, to get started, would you mind giving us a quick synopsis of
Straight under the bus.
who you are? Exactly.
Like, stand up in front of the class and introduce yourself. You're the newbie.
Exactly.
You are correct. Hi, my name is Victoria and I am an ex-financial advisor. I run a mortgage broking business here in Melbourne, but you will probably, if you know me already, you probably know me from the podcast She's on the Money, which is the #1 business and finance podcast at the moment in Australia, which is kind of cool.
It's so fucking cool.
It's kind of cool. I don't know how we've done it. I still have massive imposter syndrome. I'm like, someone's going to come in and be like, you can't do this anymore. But that's okay. I've just got a lot of audacity to make up for the imposter syndrome. So yeah, that's, I guess, me in a nutshell. My background is actually in psychology, which marries really nicely with finance. And I am wildly passionate about empowering especially women when it comes to understanding finances and the power behind finance, because I don't think until now we've ever been let into this space. And not only have we not been let into this space, it's really dry and boring. So I try really hard to make it interesting so that at least the impact is lasting. So yeah, that's what I do and where I come from, and a quick background.
That's amazing. Actually, we pulled some stats when we were doing research for this, and this one really stood out to me. It was only in 1971 that the Bank of New South Wales, now Westpac, became the first to grant loans to women without requiring a male guarantor.
Isn't it crazy?
It blows my mind.
I'd use more
It's crazy.
obscene language to describe it personally.
And it was much later than that that women were allowed credit cards,
I
because
know.
we can't be trusted. And I remember starting my business, and, you know, I feel like I have always been so well supported by so many beautiful women, and like my mum is one of them. And they would always just be like, I'm from Tasmania. So like you could be quite, sheltered coming from Tassie. But my mum's always like, whatever you want to do, you can do it. You can be anything. You can do anything. And I remember starting my business and being like, oh, I'm doing this, 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 and this. And my mum's like, do you know that when she started like a business when she was 21, she bought a general store in Tasmania. She's like, I wanted to start this business, but her dad had to co-sign on her loan to like buy the business. And I was like, wait, what? But what's your dad got to do with this? Like, what would my grandpa like have to say? Because if you know my family, you would know that my grandpa was a farmer who dropped out at grade 9 and was dyslexic. So my grandma did all of the budgeting and the cash flow and the management of the farm. So I was like, that makes no sense. And mum's like, that's the world I lived in.
Oh, yeah. Well, I feel
Insane, right?
we still live in some version of that world. I remember buying my first house. Brie knows this story. And they asked me that when I was popping everything through for my loan, who helped me buy the house? Like there was just an assumption.
Me, I helped me.
I worked my ass off and saved and saved and saved and saved. I had no contribution from my family. Not that if you do, great, good for you.
Oh, money win for you.
Exactly. But the assumption there that a single woman
Where
buying
did your
a house,
deposit come
where did it come
from?
from? Who gave it to you? And there was the underlying message, and it must have come from my
Did you
dad.
forget to put your partner's details
I
on the
know,
application?
honey, you left some information
Oh.
off. It was very much like that. And even later on with my husband, asking him to guarantor a loan when he was at the stay-at-home parent in our family and not working at that time,
so
and I was the
funny.
breadwinner. I'm like, why?
I remember
Why?
looking for
This
our-
makes no physical sense.
I remember looking for our first property. My then boyfriend and I were buying together, now husband, and we'd go to all of these, open homes and have a look at these like great homes, and I would be completely ignored.
Oh, yeah.
And my husband would be like, oh, I don't know, you should ask her. Like she's the financial advisor. She's the one that set the budget. She's the one that's actually done all the research on the sub. She's why we're here. Like my husband's always like, I'm just along for the ride. Like, it's actually wild how many just like disregarded me and went straight to my husband to ask questions. Or you'd be at the bank talking about something and they would literally face their entire body to my husband. And thankfully, I've got a staunch feminist husband, and he'd be like, you're talking to the wrong person.
Good.
And I would always be like, yes, slay.
This is why I married you.
Yes, king.
So obviously we're going up against years and years of gender bias.
Yes.
And learning how to break that down. And I think financial literacy is something that we've spoken about a lot. And I'll put my hand up and say it's something that I still need to work on. How did you get into a career in finance?
Accidentally. Like I wish I could say, oh my gosh, I just always knew that I was wildly passionate about finance. I think I should have seen it coming. I'm born on the 30th of June, so I'm an end of financial year baby. My dad is an accountant. Like it's kind of in a way written in my stars. But I think if you step back a little bit, I wanted to be a psychologist, and I went through 2 degrees, was working in the space of organizational psychology, kind of loved it, but hated how immeasurable the impact was. Like you guys are business owners, you would talk about employee engagement and culture all the time. It's kind of like a feels thing. It's not really like a measurement thing. And that was the space I was working in. So one thing that I really struggled with was kind of benchmarking and going, we have changed, because like a survey of how your employees feel today is going to be different to how they feel tomorrow. So hard to measure. And at the time I was terrible with finances. So like I kind of flew through my degrees quite young, got it done, was the youngest consultant working in this like very corporate team. And I thought I was a big dog. I earned like $55,000 including superannuation, and it was the biggest salary I'd seen in my entire life. I thought I had made it at that point. So obviously I went to Saba and bought a whole heap of suits so I could fit in. And then Saba's gateway drug to Scanlon Theatre.
It's a step up to scam.
As a step up, you've got to make the step up. But obviously on a $55,000 salary, that's not reasonable. And then I wanted to do all this other stuff with my life. I was like, well, obviously I'm a bit nerdy. I don't know if that's coming across yet, but I wanted to do my MBA. And then through my MBA, I got offered a exchange program in France. And I was like, well, I want to do that, but I had no money because I'd spent it all at Scanlon. So the next best thing, obviously you get a personal loan. So by the age of 22, I was in $45,000 worth of personal debt on a $55,000 salary. You can probably tell that was pre-Royal Commission.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah,
who
like,
let
because
that happen? Yeah.
that's now probably illegal. But I was in this massive pickle. I wasn't sleeping properly. I didn't realize how heavy it would weigh on me when I signed up for it. Because in my head, I was like, great, now I can do everything I want to do. But then you have these monthly repayments that stop you from living the rest of your life and going out with girlfriends. Like, you just don't have any money to do anything because you can either miss your debt repayment or you could go out for coffee. And I was 22. You know what one I wanted to do?
100%.
So I couldn't sleep. I just had literally the worst mental health at that point in time, and I realized I needed to get my financial stuff together. So I started looking into it, and one of my clients was a financial advisor. And obviously, I was never going to tell the client that I was in that position. However, learning financial literacy through, I guess, being in that office, because I got seconded to that office, seeing what financial advisors could do, seeing the power of super, seeing the power of saving and investing, and, you know, maybe being a little bit ashamed of my debt, which now sounds silly, but at the time I was just embarrassed. And so I completely restructured my finances, you know, made some really hard decisions so I could pay it off. Did pay it off, but I think that's what taught me the power of finance. It wasn't, you know, oh, you can get money and it's really fun to live a good life. It was like, oh my gosh, I can sleep now. It was, oh my gosh, like I can now create the life that I want to have. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much power there was in superannuation. And I became so annoying. Like all my girlfriends at brunch, I'd be like, Jess, have you heard of this? So super is very sexy. And then you'd be like, I want to talk about the weekend. And I'd be like, So let's get out an investment like compound calculator. So not the coolest curl ever, but yeah, like I guess one thing led to another, and I realized I was just wildly passionate about this and kind of decided to take the leap from that psychology role into a finance role and work my way up, and decided that I was, you know, audacious enough to start my own business in it, and it worked. So
That's incredible.
yeah, that's, I guess, how I got to where I am now.
That's incredible. And I think what you said then about having those conversations with your girlfriends is important because it doesn't happen. And I do think it's an inherently female thing.
Yeah.
When I go to boys' lunches, there's a lot more talk of stocks and what people are investing in and even talking about their super. Actually, this is one thing I was talking to my husband about, just to dive straight in, get my own personal finance advice while I'm here. We were comparing our super accounts, and his is significantly larger than mine, which, yes, he's older than me, and yes, he hasn't taken mat leave twice. But even when we did the calculations, he's still significantly up on me because he self-manages.
Yeah.
And I have done what I thought I was supposed to do, which is put it in an account and forget about it until I retire.
Yeah.
And as I said before, I'm putting my hand up being like, I know this is a problem, but I don't even know the first step of like how to approach that.
Like, why would you do that when there's so many other things? Like, you've got 2 kids to go and chase. Like, I don't particularly want to call Australian Super and have a chat with them.
No.
Because, like, I don't even know what to ask. I think it's cool now because it's as though we've been given permission to step into this space, whereas before it's been quite tightly gatekept. It's like a boys' conversation. It's a boys' chat and, oh, don't worry, you wouldn't understand it, Brie. Like, and it's not them trying to be rude. It's them going, oh, well, you've never spoken about this before. Why would you understand it now? And I think that men in general kind of like to trump themselves and talk about, you know, stocks and, you know, their super and their investments. But it doesn't mean they know what they're talking about
100%.
Because research tells us that if you compare male and female investors, women are better at investing than men. But we also question ourselves a whole heap more and then would never step up and be like, oh, I'm pretty good at that at a barbecue. Like, are you going to turn around and like even in front of your girlfriends be like, yeah, so super, I'm actually really good at that. Like, we wouldn't do it. We'd be like, oh, yeah, what did you want to know? So I think women and men approach these conversations in such different ways, which has arguably kept us out of the space in addition to all of the other barriers. But now it's kind of like, let's break it down. Let's talk about it. What about super do you need to understand? How do you actually work backwards? How much do you need in super? You know, a lot of the conversation I'm having right now because I am pregnant is from people DMing me being like, V, what are you doing with your superannuation while you're on mat leave? And I'm in the lucky position where I'm going to keep contributing because I'm not a salaried employee. But for salaried employees, I'm like, well, have you spoken to your partner or your husband about them contributing to your super? And it's not an easy conversation, but it's one that puts you but also your family unit first, if that's the plan. And I think, yeah, we should be having these conversations because it shouldn't be awkward. It's just, oh, you're going on mat leave? No worries. So is your partner contributing to your super, or have you got this background plan to, like, you know, not everyone has the cash flow to do that, let's be honest, but have you got a backup plan that maybe when you return from mat leave, you just pay 1 or 2% more a year to make up for the time that you were off? Or, you know, if you're young and going, one day I really want kids, can you bump it up so that we get there before the fact, so that you're always a bit ahead? I think there's a lot of conversation to have around it, but there's no right or wrong answer, because unfortunately there's no one size fits all finance advice. I wish there was. It'd make my job so much easier.
But even as you said, just the fact that we need to start talking about it and thinking about it and taking that control back, because a simple thing like super, it can have such a lasting impact. And if you start earlier with compounding and, you know, the interest that you earn, by the time you get to that time when you retire, you really thank yourself for going back. I'm trying to think what else is relevant for our audience.
Oh my God, there's so many things. I think I'd love to double back on the starting point for conversations, because I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about. I don't think a lot of, whether it's women or people, even know the right questions to ask and what is the right safe space to take those first steps in. Like, is it go straight to an expert? Is it start having those conversations amongst your friends and just dip your toe in and feel a little bit more comfortable? Because I remember the beginning of my own financial literacy journey, very similar to you, coming off the back of getting myself into stupid amounts of debt that I shouldn't have been allowed to. I mean, I had fun, but then it wasn't very fun after.
But then it wasn't fun after.
And, you know, I was young and I didn't, no one really gave me any kind of structure or education around this. And I made stupid decisions. I made impulse decisions, very much driven by making myself feel good in the moment without much thought into what would happen long term.
Yeah.
I think it's important to set that tone, because you could listen to this and be like, oh, well, you're 3 successful business owners. What would you know? No, I know everyone in this room has made bad financial decisions now.
But I think that's why we have to talk about
it
when we have the privilege of sitting in these chairs, like as 3 arguably successful business owners, to, you know, reflect on. And I remember when I was starting She's on the Money. So I started She's on the Money. It was a little Facebook group off the back of some workshops I did, and people would talk about financial, like, debt and stuff in my group. And I remember thinking at the time when I was just starting that up, I'm like, oh, that's exactly the position I would be in. But my answers in the group were never, I've been there, don't worry. It would always be like, oh, well, here are the best steps you can take. And it was helpful. But what I didn't want to be was that, you know, that leader in that space that then was admitting that they'd had massive amounts of personal debt. I'm like, that doesn't make me look good, does it? But now I think we've really reframed it. And I'm like, hold on. My community is going to be so much more comfortable with me knowing parts of my journey, knowing that I did go through that, and I know you because I am you. I'm not actually that different. Yes, I have a business and that's great, but, like, I'm not that different to the average bear. And I think that so many times we put on these pedestals. You own a business, right? So you must be like, you've got your stuff so sorted out. You must know everything. And the reality of it is, as someone who is an ex-financial advisor, mainly to women business owners, we don't know what we're doing. Like, we've just been making it up, and we're very impressed that it's worked so far. And we usually just have a lot of audacity to give it a shot. And I think that needs to be the realistic conversation of, like, nah, I went there, fixed it up though. Here's how you could fix it up. And so I think those conversations, they don't just start with going to an expert, because to me that's quite overwhelming. You don't know what to ask them. But what we need to remember is that finance conversations do not have to be personal. Jess, you and I could sit down and talk about the importance of loan repayments and what superannuation is. I don't need to ask you what you earn to have that conversation. And a lot of the time I think we automatically default to money conversation. I don't want to have that because I'm going to have to tell you my personal situation. You don't have to do that. We can talk about these structures. We can talk about different things. We can talk about, you know, smaller savings goals with our friends and family without having to divulge our entire lives. Like, I feel like sometimes when it comes to finance, you're like, I would never let them see me naked. And it's like, well, you don't have to. Like, we can all wear our robes at the table. It's all good. But we also need to have these conversations so that we're all on the same page and understand it. And you can go away and then look at your personal situation and how that works. And it's even more beautiful if you're in a supportive environment where you can go, oh, well, actually, hey, can we sit down and have a look at my budget together? I'm so overwhelmed by it. That would be fantastic. But that is definitely not the gateway. That's a lot of trust, a lot of being comfortable with that conversation. So I think firstly we need to take a step back and go, well, actually finance doesn't have to be personal. We can make it personal later once you understand what we're talking about.
It's a really good point. It's funny, isn't it, that talking about our salary does still feel really taboo. And even me, I know I would never want to say it out loud.
Yeah.
Even to my closest girlfriends, I would feel like a weird comparison.
Yeah.
And it's a fear of people judging you based on how much you earn.
And it's definitely, I see this a lot more in female business owners than I do in, salary and PAYG employees, right? Because, if you say, oh, I'm a marketing manager, you might go, I'm on 120 and people will go, oh, that makes sense for your role. Or like, you might have another friend who's in marketing. They're like, oh, well, I'm on 130. Like you should be asking for a raise. I find that business owners, because our income is so variable and so based on nothing to do with being salaried and like PAYG, we often feel quite guilty. It's funny because if you ask a male business owner what they earn, they're like, well, last year I did my 7 figures, obviously. And you're just like, okay, sit down.
I love that bro energy.
Yeah, but like we don't have the bro energy. We're kind of like, oh, like especially as we sort of rise, I do have this saying and I love it. It's a rising tide lifts all ships.
Mate, that's my life motto.
Same. If I was a tattoo girly, it would be on my body somewhere, but I am not. But I look at it that way and go, yes, but I understand why you don't want to share that because it's the same reason I don't share my income with my community because it actually doesn't help. So like if I was a marketing manager, it helps for me to share my salary because my girlfriends and peers can benchmark themselves. My business is so different to your business. What does it do apart from being gloaty to go, oh, I made X last year? Because it's not comparable. And you're not going to step in and be like, oh, well, in that case, I might become a finance podcaster and start a mortgage broking business and, do all of the, it doesn't actually help and it's not constructive. And I think that we immediately feel that and go, well, I could tell my friends, but one, I don't want to make them feel bad in a way, but two, it's actually not that helpful.
Yeah, because it's not a comparable.
No.
Exactly.
While we're on the topic of salaries, I think this is an interesting topic to dive into because most women, in my experience as an employer of, we've employed hundreds of women over the years, the women we've employed struggle to have conversations about salary more than the men we've employed. They tend to value themselves less. They tend to come to the conversation about negotiating salary without as much rigor or research around it. I've found historically female employees they see one thing, they get stuck on it, and that's what they bring to the table, and it weakens their negotiation position because it's not necessarily based in like a robust argument.
It's also not reality.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very hard.
It's really difficult, and I've been on both sides of that as a previous employee and now as a business owner and always as a woman in both experiences. What would you say to any listener who wants to start that process of renegotiating their salary?
I think it's all about research. So research, and having these open conversations. I think sometimes, and this just goes for all people, not necessarily just women, but we look at our role and we have our heart and our soul in it and we go, I'm so good at this. And as a business owner, I look at it and go, yes, but the way I've valued that role is probably very different to your heart and soul way of valuing it. And it's not me trying to be mean or rude when I have this conversation. Let's go back to the marketing manager conversation. I go, okay, well, I need a marketing manager for my business. I need them to, fulfill these capabilities and, meet these KPIs. And now I'm going to go to market and look at what the benchmark is paying. Is that something I'm comfortable with? And we might in our business agree that role is worth 120. So if you're killing it at that role and that's fantastic, again, not being rude, we have to be realistic. Even if you are the best marketing manager, unless you're going to step up above that band and add additional value or contribute more, it makes no business sense to give you a salary increase every year for the same KPIs that are being met if the role hasn't increased. Don't get me wrong. I do think employers need to be looking at making sure that we're increasing salaries with inflation to make sure that, the employee is actually able to buy the same things that they were able to buy last year. And obviously, a lot of roles, like this marketing manager example, it actually could be between 120 and 150. And you might go, okay, well, they've come in at 120. They are now growing in that role and adding additional value. We can increase that. So as an employee, I would step back and go, all right, well, let's pretend that this is not my job. Can I evaluate this role? Am I being paid what the market should be being paid for this role? If the answer is no, and you've genuinely cross-checked, because it's very easy to type in marketing manager into Seek and go, well, that one's 250.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the responsibilities are the same. So cross-checking those responsibilities and KPIs, it could be confronting because you could find out that you are being underpaid. So I think being really pragmatic about evaluating your role, you might find out that you're on par, you're above par, or you're below. If you're on par, you can always have that conversation about whether there is any wiggle room, but it's actually about articulating your value to your